The government tried to punish someone twice for pulling a trigger once. And the Supreme Court of the United States said, absolutely not. All 9 justices shut it down, in a case you've probably never heard about. But if you own a gun, this decision protects you in ways you need to understand right now. What happened on January 14th could be the difference between one conviction and multiple life sentences. This impacts every gun owner in America, and here's why. Gun laws are changing constantly, and missing one update could put you in serious legal danger. Smash that subscribe button right now, because I'm breaking down every major ruling the moment it comes out. What I'm about to show you could protect you from prosecutorial overreach you didn't even know was possible. Hit subscribe, then stay with me for the next 10 minutes. Here's what happened. A man named Dwayne Barrett committed armed robberies. During one robbery, he fired his weapon and someone died. A tragic outcome for everyone involved. But here's where the case takes a constitutional turn. Federal prosecutors charged Barrett with using a firearm during a violent crime under one section of federal law. Then they charged him again under a different section for causing death with that same firearm during that same crime. Same gun, same trigger pull, same moment. 2 separate convictions, 2 separate punishments. Lower courts said this was completely legal. Barrett argued, oh wait, that's double jeopardy. He appealed all the way to the highest court in the country. On January 14th, 2026, the Supreme Court released its decision. 9 justices, no dissents, unanimous agreement that what prosecutors did violated the Constitution. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote the opinion, and every other justice joined without hesitation. When you see a 9-0 decision in today's divided court, you know something significant happened. This wasn't close. This was the court telling prosecutors they crossed a clear constitutional boundary. Let's break down what double jeopardy actually means in plain language. The Fifth Amendment says, the government cannot place you in jeopardy twice for the same offense. Jeopardy means being put on trial, facing punishment, and risking your freedom. Once the government takes its shot at convicting you, it doesn't get another attempt for the same crime. It's a core protection that goes back centuries. The concept is simple. The government has enormous power and resources. If it could retry you again and again until it got the outcome it wanted, that would be tyranny. So the Constitution says no, 1 chance per offense. But here's where things become complex. What exactly counts as the same offense? The Supreme Court has relied on a test from a 1932 decision that asks whether each charge requires proof of a fact the other does not. If crime 1 requires proof of A, B, and C, and crime 2 also requires A, B, and C, they are the same offense. But if crime 2 requires A, B, C, and D, then it's different. In that case, you can be convicted of both because there's an additional element. In Barrett's situation, both charges came from the exact same conduct. Section 924, C of federal law, makes it illegal to use a firearm during a violent federal crime. Section 924J makes it illegal to cause death during that same firearm use. Prosecutors secured convictions under both sections. They argued these were separate crimes with separate penalties. The lower courts agreed, but the Supreme Court said, let's look at what each charge actually requires. Here's what the court determined. Both charges require the same core elements. Both require proof that Barrett used a firearm during a violent federal crime. Hang on. The death is not a separate element that creates a new offense. It's a result that triggers a more severe punishment under Section J. Think of it this way. It's the same crime with an enhanced penalty. Not 2 different crimes. Because both convictions require the same proof, they are the same offense under the legal test. Convicting Barrett twice violated the double jeopardy clause. One of those convictions must be vacated. Most people don't realize how common this practice has been. Federal prosecutors have stacked gun charges for years. They look at one incident and identify multiple statutes that could apply. Then they charge all of them. Multiple convictions add years, or even decades, to a sentence. It's an extremely powerful prosecutorial strategy. One gun incident becomes several convictions. One action becomes a lifetime in prison. The Barrett decision just placed major limits on that approach. Before we go further, are you subscribed? Because what comes next could protect you from tactics you didn't even know existed. Click that subscribe button right now. These rulings come out fast, and staying updated matters. Do it now while it's on your mind. Here's why this matters for everyday gun owners who never intend to break the law. Federal gun statutes overlap heavily. There are laws covering possession, receipt, transportation, paperwork, and use in crimes. A creative prosecutor can take one situation and apply multiple federal statutes. Before Barrett, that could potentially mean multiple convictions for one event. After Barrett, prosecutors must show that each charge requires different elements. If the same basic facts are required, that's one offense, not several. Here's a real-world example. Imagine you're considered a prohibited person under federal law because of an old conviction. You're found in possession of a firearm. That's illegal possession under Section 922G. But receiving the firearm may also be illegal. And if you transported it across state lines, that could also be charged. Should prosecutors be allowed to charge all three and obtain three separate convictions? Before Barrett, possibly. After Barrett, courts must closely examine whether each charge requires different proof. If all of them only require showing you were prohibited and had control of the firearm, that likely counts as one offense, not three. Here's another situation. You make a mistake on a background check form. You check the wrong box or forget something from your past. That's a federal crime under Section 922A. But then you take possession of the firearm you purchased. If you are actually prohibited, that possession is also a federal crime under Section 922G. Can prosecutors charge both? Courts would need to analyze what each charge requires. If both charges only require proof that you were prohibited and possessed the firearm, they may be considered the same offense under the Barrett ruling. This is the part that really surprised me when I looked deeper into this case. The implications stretch far beyond violent crime, prosecutions. Anytime federal prosecutors attempt to stack multiple gun charges from a single course of conduct, defense attorneys can now cite Barrett. They can argue that the charges are actually the same offense built on the same elements. That forces prosecutors to be more precise and more balanced in how they bring charges. It removes some of their leverage and gives defendants stronger protection. Now here's where things get even more interesting. Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote a separate opinion, even though he agreed with the outcome. He wanted to point out deeper concerns within double jeopardy law itself. Gorsuch noted that courts often allow prosecutors to charge someone with multiple crimes in a single trial, like murder and manslaughter. As long as only one conviction ultimately happens, courts typically say, that's acceptable. But Gorsuch raises a difficult question. If the Constitution says a person cannot be placed in jeopardy twice for the same offense, shouldn't that apply even inside one trial? The language says twice. So does that mean you shouldn't face the same charge in multiple forms, even if everything happens in the same courtroom at the same time? This is constitutional law at its deepest level. Gorsuch is suggesting that the court's current double jeopardy framework might need major reconsideration. He's essentially saying that prosecutors may have been given too much flexibility for too long, and that stricter limits might be required when multiple charges arise from the same conduct. That idea could reshape criminal law in ways we can't fully predict yet, but it shows how seriously some justices view these constitutional protections. Here's something else that isn't being talked about enough. This ruling fits into a broader pattern during this current term of the Supreme Court of the United States. The justices have reached unanimous decisions in several criminal law cases, when all 9 justices, from the most liberal to the most conservative, agree that signals something important. It suggests the government's legal position was so aggressive that every justice rejected it. Barrett is exactly that type of case. The government argued that one gun crime could be split into 2 convictions with 2 punishments. Every justice agreed that approach was unconstitutional. Here's a wild stat. Around 75% of people watching this video aren't subscribed to this channel. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss critical legal updates that help protect your rights. Do it right now. Do it right now. Let's talk about the real-world impact on federal gun prosecutions moving forward. Prosecutors can't simply pile on every possible charge anymore. They must carefully examine each one. Does this charge require proof that's different from the others? If not, then they're the same offense and only one conviction is allowed. This changes how prosecutors evaluate cases from the very beginning. It changes which charges are filed, and it changes their leverage during plea negotiations. Speaking of plea deals, this is huge. Most federal criminal cases never reach trial. They end in negotiated agreements. Prosecutors often use the threat of multiple stacked charges to pressure defendants into pleading guilty. They may say, take this deal for 2 charges or risk trial where we bring 8, and you spend the rest of your life in prison. That leverage just became weaker. Defense attorneys can now point to Barrett and argue that several of those charges are actually the same offense. If multiple convictions aren't legally possible at trial, the bargaining power changes. That could lead to fairer outcomes overall. Here's a hypothetical example to make this clearer. Imagine you're at a shooting range with a friend and you let him fire your firearm. Later you find out he had a prior felony conviction you didn't know about. You may have transferred a firearm to a prohibited person, which is a federal crime. But prosecutors might also claim you aided possession by a prohibited person, which is another federal offense. Can both charges be brought? Under Barrett, prosecutors would need to prove that each offense requires different elements. If both only require proof that you gave the firearm to a prohibited person, that's one offense, not 2. Here's one of the biggest misconceptions people have about rulings like this. They think, I follow the law, so this doesn't apply to me. That's incorrect. Constitutional protections apply to everyone. These rules define how much power the government has over all of us. When the Supreme Court limits prosecutorial overreach, it strengthens fairness across the entire system. You may never commit a crime, but if you ever faced accusations or someone close to you did, these protections could be the difference between fairness and abuse of power. Now here's something that really stood out in this decision. The court didn't just say Congress failed to clearly authorize multiple convictions. And the justices suggested that even if Congress tried to authorize it, there would be a serious constitutional issue. That's extremely significant. It means even if lawmakers passed a new statute explicitly allowing stacked convictions in this situation, the Supreme Court could still strike it down as unconstitutional. The double jeopardy protection isn't about legislative intent. It's about constitutional limits. Some boundaries simply cannot be crossed no matter what Congress passes. If you're enjoying this breakdown, my next video covers the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit case that recently struck down California's open carry ban. That ruling impacts millions of gun owners. Subscribe so it appears in your feed the moment it goes live. You won't want to miss it. Let's talk about what happens to Dwayne Barrett specifically. The Supreme Court reversed the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit and sent the case back to lower courts. One of his 2 convictions must be dismissed. He will still face significant prison time for the remaining conviction, but he will not be punished twice for a single trigger pull. That's the Constitution working exactly as intended. The government cannot double punish someone simply because 2 statutes technically apply to the same conduct. The broader impact reaches thousands of federal gun cases every year. Every prosecutor handling a gun case now has to account for the Barrett decision. Every defense attorney can now cite Barrett. Every judge has to apply it. This decision reverberates throughout the entire federal criminal justice system. It strengthens constitutional protections. It limits government power and makes the system more equitable for everyone involved. Here's what you need to remember from this ruling. First, the Supreme Court of the United States unanimously rejected double convictions for gun crimes with identical elements. 9-0, no debate. Second, it restricts how prosecutors can stack charges in federal cases moving forward. Third, it safeguards everyone from government overreach, not just those accused of crimes. And fourth, it demonstrates the court's commitment to enforcing constitutional limits, even in gun cases. These are major victories for the rule of law and individual rights. But here's a warning. Not every prosecutor has absorbed the lesson yet. Some may continue attempting to stack charges until judges intervene on a case-by-case basis. If you ever face federal charges, you need a lawyer who knows Barrett inside and out. You need someone who will aggressively assert double jeopardy defenses. Never assume the government will automatically follow the Supreme Court's guidance. You must fight for your rights at every stage. The takeaway here extends beyond one case. It's about the Constitution and whether it still protects Americans. The double jeopardy clause exists in the Bill of Rights for a reason. It stops the government from punishing you repeatedly for the same offense. It limits government authority and protects individual liberty. When prosecutors try to bypass it through creative charging, the Supreme Court will step in. That is exactly what happened in Barrett. That should give every American confidence that constitutional protections remain strong. Here's my bottom line. Barrett v. United States is a huge victory for constitutional rights. It's a unanimous rebuke of prosecutorial overreach in federal gun cases. Every gun owner should know this case because it changes how federal charges are handled nationwide. The Supreme Court drew a clear line and told prosecutors they cannot cross it. You don't get to punish someone twice for one act. You don't get to split one crime into multiple convictions to inflate sentences. The Constitution forbids it, and now that protection is stronger than ever. I spend hours researching and breaking down complex legal decisions so you can understand them in minutes. Support this work by hitting that subscribe button. It takes 2 seconds and helps this channel continue. Do it now. Here's your action step. Share this video with other gun owners in your life. Make sure people understand what Barrett means for their rights. If you know anyone facing federal charges, tell their lawyer about this case. Stay informed as new rulings come out. The Supreme Court is reshaping gun law right now. Lower courts are issuing significant decisions every month. You can't afford to miss these updates if you care about your Second Amendment rights. The Constitution only works when people know their rights and actively defend them. Barrett took his case all the way to the Supreme Court. It probably took years, but in the end, the court enforced his constitutional rights. They said no to double punishment. They protected the double jeopardy clause. And they did it unanimously. That should inspire all of us to defend our rights whenever government overreach occurs. Don't let this information sit idle. Use it, share it, remember it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. My next video drops in 48 hours covering another bombshell gun rights case. You won't want to miss it.